Welcome to TradeTheNBI.com. This is John. This reports for the 2nd of April. Well, the train wreck of inflation continues. Not even a remote surprise, according to us, because we could see what was happening. It's a problem because now the bond market is starting to wake up to the reality that, with inflation, particularly with manufacturing prices skyrocketing and everything else, it's going to be difficult to justify the Fed doing anything from a softening standpoint. So their 100% expectation of the Fed cutting rates getting softened just a little bit, it created some pressure on the market, not a whole lot. I mean, all we did was move back down to the ABM, and we just literally came and filled the positive extremes we were expecting anyway. So not much of a surprise. From a NASDAQ standpoint, a little bit less of a movement because it had been sort of quelled from the earlier stance where the S&P had been moving, and the Nasdaq not quite as much, but still, I mean, the readings are soft, but they're not horrible because you just don't have a significant amount of short interest. And again, what are you going to do with your money? Treasuries obviously moving back towards closer to reality with the yield increasing, but that's got further to go to get to where rates are actually at. So. Still not there. And we can see that inflation is going to ramp up here towards the middle part and starting to accelerate, not just stay increased, but accelerating now as we see a huge move in oil. And this was expected. I mean, with all the supply constraints that were being built into it, the fact that the U.S. is restricting, oil production and then you have the problems worldwide that started to escalate. You had the bombing that took place of the Iranian situation from Israel, and the Russians jumped on that one. So there's going to be a lot of added world tensions, and that's terrifying for the market because there's a lot of unknowns. What if the Iranians decide to step up activities, in the Red Sea or anywhere else, and that puts a threat to oil supply, and everybody gets a little terrified at that prospect, rightfully so, because it can really upend a whole lot of things. And at 85, that's just not containable. And as we've pointed out, the euro, it's a capital flight situation. You've got to buy oil in U.S. dollars, and what are you going to do with the euro? And the eurozone keeps bone jawing about how they're preparing for war. That literally a lot of situations, and it really puts a lot of exposure on the market because look at this gold. When have we not talked about how gold was going to continue to explode? There's just no way to contain it at this particular stage. And with that comes the crypto, which actually reacted much faster. And it's beautiful with the sign under red. There's no question about that move. None at all. From a crypto standpoint, it had accelerated faster than gold at the beginning. It just was more reactive, and that's simply because it's a little easier to move than it is with the much broader gold market. But nonetheless, it usually trails and has difficulty when there's market sell-off because obviously people rotate for liquidity purposes. And then the same thing happens with gold even too, but gold still ultimately is going to continue its rampage, particularly in stride as well as probably proportional or even out proportional to what oil is doing, simply because that inflation it's built in and you're not seeing any change in spending. I mean, they already approved a budget, and that's how it's out of control from that standpoint. ETH also suffering, has been a little bit behind where Bitcoin had gone, but it had a previous acceleration speed. And it just, look at, we were talking about the positive extremes, still got a little further to go. Technical fill right there with the dip on that previous one, but it's still going to be a draw point, at least to the 50% within the early stages right now. And then here we go from a 50K. We were talking about how we were expecting the 90 range to fill with positive extremes. And we had this initial positive extreme setup that was right there around 93, I believe it was. And that's where we've kind of coalesced right at this particular point, which is just shy of the 50% setup at this particular stage. So all that's pretty well within line with our expectations. You can see what happened. So it was the early morning started to get a feel for it. And then as the information started trickling out about prices and where they were going and how unexpected it was, and which to me is always laughable, because what was unexpected about it? I mean, really, what was unexpected? Now, some people might be saying, well, then why aren't we seeing a bigger market drop? Well, you got a couple of other factors playing into this from an economic standpoint. Ever since the pandemic, you've had a reduction in labor available for what's being produced. You've had a mass retirement, from the older set. So, from a labor supply area, you have a limited supply range, but so demand was outstripping that. Now you've seen, some layoffs and things like that, or just a smaller amount of job openings. So that displacement of needed labor versus what was available is starting to dwindle. When that finally, I mean, technically you'd be in a labor recession already. Given what we're seeing from the job numbers, and that despite what they do with the manipulation, which you're not seeing though is that affecting GDP, simply because there's been an imbalance with an inversion where there just hasn't been enough labor supply to keep up with the demand that already existed. And just because people are retired and aren't in the workforce doesn't mean they aren't consuming. So they're still doing that. They're just no longer a productive member of production. So while GDP may hold, and let's not forget, the government is spending $1 trillion extra every 3 months, and that is enough to help sustain things. But you can see that that's on a dead end curve, particularly when you look at the number of government employees versus regular workers, and that ratio is at a historic highs. And so these eventually will start to weigh heavily. Hasn't happened yet, but because it's not affecting profits in a broader sense. But that time's coming, and this is just something you need to be aware of to prepare for. And as the eventualities play out, we'll see it. But for now, it's not too unreminiscent of '08, and that's just a different configuration with where we're at with labor and demand, as well as supply and those broader economic issues. But we'll see it, because at this particular stage, what else do you do with your money? I mean, beyond putting it into commodities, gold, and that, you still have businesses that are making money and propelling, but that inflation of devaluation is always going to cause the market value to increase, and that's just a natural byproduct of this situation. So, as always, though, continue to update you with anything relevant on the Skype chat. Have a good one. Trade well. We'll talk again later.